Hello, everyone. My name is Carly Savell, and I'm a talking person. Today, I am joined by Ace Howlen. She is based in Virginia. She has an MFA in creative writing, and she recently launched a blog. Literally, just what was it, yesterday?
hmm
Yesterday, she has a new blog called Crystal Queer. So, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Where do we want to start?
I guess I could start with my literary adventure. Um,
Hmm.
it's been a little slower than I would have liked. There's a lot of I guess a lot of belief that once you get your master's degree, you can kind of go anywhere and do anything.
Yeah.
That hasn't really been the case for me, so it's been quite discouraging. I did start teaching high school English right after I graduated, which was great to have something to go directly into. It wasn't as great of an experience as it could have been for a brand new teacher. I was starting in the classroom right when schools were going back to the classroom from COVID. So
Mm,
my students were super anxious, a lot of reluctance to actually like participate and talk. Um, but they actually ended up being the most rewarding and joyful part of that whole experience. My first blog post is about my experience as a queer teacher specifically. So I talked about some of the experiences that I dealt with, introducing my wife, who presents masculine, to my coworkers. Most of the people in the English department were great and receptive and welcoming,
yeah.
but Yorktown is a very conservative area, so she definitely got stared at by a lot of my coworkers and was made to feel pretty uncomfortable. Um,
Oh.
and then I was also the GSA advisor for the Gay Straight Alliance, or Gender and Sexualities Alliance. Um, and that presented a whole different set of challenges with it, mostly because I was advocating for the students first and foremost, but at the same time, kind of not realizing that I was also advocating for myself, being the only queer teacher in that whole building. So it was a ride, to say the least. Um, and I actually left teaching in the middle of the semester, my second year. So I'm like part of that statistic, new teachers that only make it like 5 years. As much as I hate to be part of statistics, we all fall into some of them.
Mhm.
Um, so I had to take time for myself and leave that environment. And that was in, I think, 2023 that I left.
Pretty
So,
recently.
yeah, recently enough that I still have nightmares about it. Um,
Oh.
just mostly just about, being unprepared in the classroom, not having lessons made, having just all the things go wrong. Um, but during the time since I got my MFA, which is in 2021, I've still been submitting my poetry for publication. And I've had poems published each year. I've been submitting manuscripts and chapbooks and pretty much any variation of a collection that I can submit. Um, but it's a lot different than trying to establish yourself as a writer in a fiction or nonfiction genre, mostly because you don't necessarily have a literary agent like a lot of fiction and nonfiction writers get. So there isn't necessarily someone kind of like vouching for you through the process. You're pretty much submitting to presses and journals, submitting to contests and awards, and just like hoping that somebody picks it up. So that has been where most of my struggle has been. Um, Poetry is definitely one of the humanities that kind of matches that starving artist trope or stereotype, because you're not getting paid for every publication that gets published or accepted. And at the same time, if you're submitting to a manuscript submission, or a contest reading, you're going to pay a fee to even submit your
Yeah.
work. And when you're not making a whole lot of money up front, that can slow down the rate at which you're able to submit. So that's been where I've mostly fallen, in that journey. Um, So I started my WordPress website a few years ago to kind of have an online portfolio of what has been published. Um, and I make sure to update it anytime I get some submissions accepted, although I do need to update it with what I've had published this year.
Mhm.
And this year has actually been my best year for publications.
Oh,
Um,
yay.
yeah, so I'm really excited about that. I'm trying to use that momentum to kind of make this my year that something actually like happens publication wise, like manuscript wise. Um, I've had a completed manuscript for a couple of years that I've just kind of like added to every time I get a new really great poem that goes along with that theme. Um, but I had a poem published in Arcana magazine last month, and that was a really personal poem about my coming out experience with my dad and my granddad, who are very conservative, and my relationship with them is much better now than it was at the time.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was complicated. There was a very big concern about having children in a same-sex
Mm,
relationship,
yeah.
and I've educated them since then on the possibilities for same-sex couples.
Yeah.
So things are a lot more hopeful than they were at that time. But that poem was actually recently selected for the CLMP, which is the Community of Literary Presses and Magazines, or Literary Magazines and Presses,
Yeah.
for their Pride Month reading list. And that is like the
That's
biggest,
amazing.
yeah, that's like the biggest win that
Yeah.
I've ever had with my writing. I've never won any awards yet. Knock on wood, hopefully something comes soon. But that in
But that's so
itself,
meaningful too. Like that's so
yeah,
meaningful. Like other
absolutely.
kids are going to get to read that and
Yes.
get a
Yeah.
little bit of confidence in coming out to their own family and know that if it's not initially okay, it's going to be.
Yeah, that's my hope. And even though it's not like a monetary award, it still comes with a lot of heightened exposure. The
Mhm.
CLMP is something that a lot of different magazines and presses and individual poets go to find new material to read. So I'm really excited and just felt unbelievably grateful that I was even nominated for that. So I'm still kind of rolling on the high from that. And then I've got 3 poems coming out in the Queer Gaze magazine either this month or next month. And then I have another 3 poems coming out in a poetical magazine sometime this summer as well. So more poems in a year than I think I've ever had picked up. So I'm really rolling on the waves of that right now. Still trying to submit to manuscript submissions when I can. Um, but I think poetry is kind of gaining some momentum in terms of like art genres and literary genres in general. And one of my biggest focuses with my poetry is political. Not even before I came out as a queer person, which I didn't do until I was like 27.
Mhm.
Um, I was reading mostly political poetry, and I've always had a very like heightened sense of justice.
Mhm.
Like I get in trouble for running my mouth for causes that don't personally affect me, but I care about everybody and the success and the safety of everybody. So poems from poets of all different backgrounds have always spoken to me in that way. Um, so that's where my poetry kind of resides, and it's only grown in that sense since I've come out as a queer person. Um, and I guess branching off of that, I would talk about being a queer person during my MFA time, which was in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is another very conservative area. And I met a handful of wonderful people through my program. But my wife and I, who were only dating at the time, also experienced quite a bit of prejudice and discrimination.
Yeah.
Um, and through the poetry reading that I did, I just learned so much about what queer people historically have been experiencing since before there were even words to describe all of it. Um,
Mhm.
I've been really interested in kind of highlighting how much queer history exists that predates Stonewall. Because the Stonewall riots are kind of where a lot of people think that the gay rights movement originated.
Yeah. It was a
And
turning point. It was not the
exactly,
original
yes.
start. Yeah.
Yeah. So my manuscript, that sounded really southern. My manuscript is called Fire Starters, and the title poem for that was actually published by the Moonstone Art Center based in Pennsylvania a couple years ago.
Mhm.
And that poem kind of is sort of like this walkthrough of the research that I was doing, learning about all of the different public bathhouses and gay bars and queer public spaces that were being raided by police long before Stonewall happened.
Yeah.
Um, and especially linking it to World War II and the book bannings that were happening specifically to Magnus Hirschfeld's like Institute on Sexual Research. Um, I was kind of just dumbfounded by the lack of history or the lack of archival material that was available specific to queer people and queer history. And through that research, kind of realized that's a big part of why, because a lot of the stuff that was
Yeah.
available before World War II was starting to get burned. And that was
Yeah.
what kind of like led into the treatment of queer people during the Holocaust
Mhm.
or the legislation against them after the Holocaust, and
Yeah.
even the the 1946 revised standard version of the Bible, which is the first time the word homosexual is even in a Bible.
Therefore,
Um,
yeah, that's the first time it was even introduced because it wasn't
yes,
in there before.
yes, and so I love any opportunity to turn my writing into a way to sort of educate and enlighten people from a compassionate perspective. Um, communicating that we're not we're not all pedophiles and sodomites or whatever those archaic words are typically used to describe. Um, that's actually something very different. And the fact that
Yeah.
it was translated as just being a blanket statement of homosexual has done quite a lot of damage on the queer community throughout our history since then.
Yeah. And we're
Um,
seeing it now, that inflammatory rhetoric,
yes,
especially toward trans people. And I know on a
yes,
previous episode, I talked about how J.K. Rowling's
oh
words
my
and the way that she's
gosh,
funneling her money into anti-trans, not just organizations, but legislation in the UK. And
yeah.
we're seeing it again here. I mean, you talk about burning books, and we're seeing those book bans pop up
Hmm.
again here, which is frankly one of the first signs of fascism that we've seen throughout history
Absolutely.
is censoring and making sure people can't share information.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important for artists or politicians, really anybody that has a kind of public platform, to expose that similarity and enlighten people to the patterns that we're starting to see return and how dangerous that is. Um, Especially even with the the Israel and Palestine and Iran debates. There's so many Orthodox religious people that are claiming that you would be killed if you went to one of those countries,
Oh my gosh,
as
yeah.
if there aren't any queer people in those countries, as if people in our own country aren't behaving the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly hypocritical, and it's also just really sad. Um, Especially, I was reading something earlier on a Christian website. I thought this post was recognizing the damage of the biblical mistranslations, but it was actually kind of saying that the mistranslations hadn't done any damage. And it was just mind boggling to see like the comments on
Mm,
these posts. There were some comments
yeah.
that were like correcting the main poster, um, but a lot of it was just repeating that same discriminatory and prejudicial rhetoric, um, not really understanding all of the different levels of like intersectionality, and how you really can't know a person just from looking at them. And that it's really important. I mean, first off, the thing that I learned when I was growing up in the church, I don't go to church anymore, but when I was growing up in Sunday school classes, I was taught that God had planned your whole life for you before you were born, that it was all sort of like his design and his plan. Um, we sang Jesus Loves All the People song,
Mhm.
just all of these things about, loving thy neighbor and all of that. And then as I grew up and kind of saw the hypocrisy in it, it sort of made me break away from that.
Yeah.
Um,
I had a similar experience too. I was raised Catholic. I don't go to church anymore, but I went so far as to like volunteer and help teach Sunday school. And
oh, wow.
I feel like my level of Catholicism, just like I loved working with little kids. I wanted to be a teacher at the time, and so it was just a great experience to volunteer and work with these kids. But I feel like my level of Catholicism, my beliefs have always aligned with kind of what we were teaching that grade of students, first graders. It was like be kind to one another, don't
Yeah.
hurt people. It like that level of Christianity was the version of the faith that I identified most with, and
Hmm.
that was my spirituality. And going through all the way up to like Catholic confirmation in 8th grade for me, I just started feeling very distant from kind of the information they start giving you once you hit like 4th, 5th
Absolutely.
grade and then get into middle school. It turns into a lot of like abortion is wrong, and if you die by suicide, you're going to hell. There were a lot
Hmm.
of those ideas. I mean, there there's just kind of a lack of like the nuance in those issues that
Yeah,
I just feel
absolutely.
like none of that was expressed in the classes. And obviously people are volunteers in Sunday school settings, which I think is another problem. But um yeah, I've always called myself an a la carte Catholic because I kind of ascribe to the like be kind to one another and none of the like I don't think hell exists. And
Yeah.
I think that there's just a lot of problems with organized religion and the Catholic
Yeah.
Church specifically.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was like half raised. My parents were divorced, so I only went to church with my
Hmm.
dad and stepmom.
Mm.
But it was the Baptist community, which is
Got it.
traumatizing. Um,
Got
so
it.
I would say pretty much the exact same thing. Like I don't necessarily I consider myself more spiritual than religious, as people
Yeah.
say. Definitely a little bit of like paganism and like witchery kind of stuff in there too.
Yeah. Or
I love
yeah.
nature.
Or
Um,
like not atheist, never atheist, but like smart enough to know that like
yeah,
there could be something out there and who am I to say what it is? So now I kind of
exactly.
say like agnostic a la
Yeah,
carte
no,
Catholic.
I like that too. I mean, I've always, even though I don't prescribe to a religion currently, I love Jesus. I love everything Jesus taught about. Um, I think it gets really dangerous when adults in organized religion start to cherry pick which parts of the religion in the Bible they want to preach and carry on, I guess, all the while ignoring when Jesus was flipping tables in temples and, I don't know, raging against the rich people and, washing the feet of poor people and feeding the hungry and all of those sorts of things. Those are what I align with. Um, and I was going somewhere else, but it has lost the station. Um, But yeah, I think it's really important to sort of recognize those disparities within religion, especially nowadays when the LGBT community is kind of becoming re-vilified by the public as if we're all immoral and against religion. Like I know a ton of queer people who are religious and do go to church
Yeah.
and follow it the way that good people should.
Yeah. We all kind
Um,
of follow that journey. I think a lot of queer people end up distancing themselves and some come back and some don't. And I
yeah,
think, especially in your late teens, you kind of come face to face with the fact that, like, these people are trying to kind of take meaning from the Bible that isn't there. And a lot of people who are conservative who go to church think that if you're gay, you go to hell. And
Hmm.
there are plenty of churches that are LGBTQ friendly, but I think that there's
Exactly.
that time you kind of think like, why should I walk through these doors if I'm not going to be accepted?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think one of those biggest turning points for me was when I was in high school. And I had just been baptized like a year or so ago before this. I was baptized at 13,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I was maybe a freshman in high school. And the Sunday school lesson that we were receiving was by one of the moms who I had like grown up with. I was really good friends with her daughter. We'd gone to the circus together and birthday parties and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. So I always like trusted her as an adult in the church. And I didn't really, I didn't know like about my own queerness at the time. I was still kind of like in between things. I didn't really know any queer people personally. I didn't have anybody to like look up to or learn from in that sense. But I still had a sense that love is love, and if they're not hurting anybody, they should be
Yeah.
allowed to live their life the way that they wanted to. Like that just
Yeah.
seemed so human to me. And this woman was an ER nurse and had been working in the ER for like a decade or so. And she told us this story about a coworker, a female coworker of hers, who was getting married, and she was really excited for the wedding, and like they had been longtime friends, you know,
Mm-hmm.
shooting the stuff in the ER and all that. And when she learned that her female coworker was marrying another woman, she cut all ties with her. She declined the wedding invitation, and the sort of like moral of her story in this was that when we're tempted with sin, or we face temptation, we just put our hands up and say, "Get thee behind me, Satan." And that just blew me away. Um,
Yeah.
I didn't say anything at the time because I was still very like meek and didn't really want to cause any like upsets. And this church had been my stepmom's church, not necessarily my dad's church, and I was terrified of my stepmom. So
Mm, yeah.
I didn't want to like get in any trouble. Um, but it definitely changed the way that I viewed that woman, the way that I viewed the other people in the room who didn't seem to question it.
Yeah.
And it was just a very sad experience for me. Um, but yeah, things with my religious relationship definitely changed after that. That was a really big turning point.
Yeah.
And I wrote a poem
And
about that experience too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You'll have to share. I'll have to put everything down
Yeah,
in the kind of comment section below. I'll put links to everything. And it's even, religion aside, when you're growing up and you don't have many examples of queer people in your life, I know that was something for me that took me a while to kind of discover my own queerness. But when you don't have those examples and then you hear people cutting off friends after, years of friendship,
yeah,
just because of their sexuality, I think, I mean, yeah, just again, with no examples of any kind of queer joy. I always talk about this. Like, we just need examples of queer joy in media. Everybody wants to
yeah.
ban all these books. And I think what people are missing is that, there aren't more queer people now because it's trendy. There are more queer people now because they're given these examples at a younger
Hmm.
age and it's becoming more acceptable.
Right.
And I think in this digital space, it's made the world smaller. And like, I know for me, I remember you said that you were one of the advisors for the GSA club. And I remember when I joined GSA, I just thought I was an ally. And then I kind of started seeing and hearing other people's experiences. And I was like, oh, I think I'm queer.
Hmm.
I think I'm bisexual. And I, I think that in what all these legislators are doing, trying to ban books, they're missing the point that these
Absolutely.
we need this representation or else we're going to lose these kids because they're going to think
Hmm.
that something's wrong with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, it's crazy. It feels like there was this like weird time between like the 90s, not even maybe like the early 2000s up until recently, where like there wasn't really a lot of complaining or like
Yeah.
chastising of the community. And I think there still definitely was, but just not on such a political front. Um,
Yeah.
but visibility and representation is a life-saving thing, not just for queer people, but for any different background, especially people of color, people with disabilities, neurodivergent people. Like it just matters for the sake of people knowing that they're not the only person in the world with that experience. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the like core sort of characteristics of feeling safe and feeling valid just as a human is having a sense of belonging. And you can't really build a foundation for that without seeing yourself in other people or in public places. And I think that what's especially damaging is the very harmful conflation of queer people with pedophiles. And I know that
Mhm.
takes a dark turn, um, but it's something like you mentioned J.K. Rowling earlier, and
Yeah.
that's where she goes with it. She is like hard set on thinking that trans women are men who just dress up as women so that they can go assault people, which I've never heard in the news of a situation of that happening, unless it was specifically a straight man who identifies as a straight man and is just trying to cause trouble. But how many times do straight men that identify as straight men, that present as straight men, assault people without dressing up in some kind of way? I mean, that it just drives me insane that we want to vilify a group of people that are not actually harming others while overlooking the groups of people who are actively assaulting and killing and committing violence, sometimes against their own partners. I mean, domestic violence is a
Yeah.
huge problem. Um, and I actually recently learned um, about J.K. Rowling's pseudonym that she publishes other writings under. Um,
Robert Galbraith.
Robert Galbraith. Yeah,
Yeah.
that apparently is the same name of the guy who invented conversion therapy. And I don't know if you already knew that or not. I just learned that recently, and like I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. That
Yeah.
pissed me off to no end. Like all of the people that are still supporting her, still reading Harry Potter, watching the movies, the actors that are agreeing to sign on to these new projects, which why do we need more Harry Potter shows at this point?
No, exactly. And she thinks that she's being clever.
Yeah.
I I think a lot of these celebrities just love hearing their phones go off with notifications. And I think that if we all stopped talking about her
Yes.
and consuming her work and anything Harry Potter, I think that if she woke up one day, I feel like I've said this before, like on another episode, but if she woke up one day and had zero notifications, I
Mm-hmm.
think she would be enraged.
Oh yeah.
I think if we stopped caring about her, because I think that's all she's doing. I think she's
Yes.
trying to be inflammatory. I think she's trying to be clever. You know that she picked that name on purpose. She does everything she
Absolutely.
does to get people talking about her. And I mean, that's fine. I guess she feels like she's just not a good enough author anymore, that she would be irrelevant if she wasn't making a fuss about something that
Yeah.
has nothing to do with her. And I mean, when we're recording this week, we're actually recording this on um, the anniversary of Obergefell for v. Hodge. I forget.
Hodges. Yeah.
Hodges. Yeah. I always mess up the pronunciation of both of those.
Yeah.
But we're recording on the anniversary of that. And also this week, J.K. Rowling came out with some batshit statement about having cameras in bathrooms. And I mean, talk about predatory. These are the people who want to
Seriously.
protect children, and these are the same ones who are advocating for, physicals for sports where we're
Yes.
looking at
Oh my
genitalia and
God.
putting cameras in bathrooms, and they want to point at trans people and say that they're pedophiles and creeps. And it's like, I
Right.
think a lot of it comes from a place of insecurity. I think it's a lot of projecting.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like if you aren't comfortable just being yourself and being who you want to be, you have to target and latch on to groups of people who are comfortable with being themselves.
Yeah.
And there is such a gray like middle area between masculinity and femininity.
Mhm.
There's only good things that come from having a balance of that.
Yeah.
Um,
That
es-
spectrum has always existed. I mean,
yes, and
it's not new.
right, and it exists for straight people. Like men
Yeah.
have had long hair, straight men have had long hair forever. In some cultures, that's a like a significant status
Yeah.
marker. Um,
Christians love that picture of white Jesus with the long flowing hair
yeah,
and they're the ones who will say you can't have short hair, you're a girl. I mean, come
right.
on.
Yes. And I mean, you have straight men wearing makeup. I know
Mhm.
Youngblood is, I think, identifies as queer, but I mean, he presents manly, and he's got mascara. There's a ton of men, regardless of their sexuality, that are
Mhm.
wearing makeup. I had students, like straight male students, that would paint their nails,
Yeah.
and then on the other hand, you've got women who are straight and identify as women that dress as tomboys. And
Yeah.
nobody in the queer community, because I do not consider pedophiles to be part of the queer community. They are a totally different sect of disgraceful human.
It was
Um,
so weird when they wanted to add themselves into the
oh my
umbrella of L.
God,
That's like,
yes.
and then when people too said that the A in LGBTQIA was ally, I
Oh,
was just
yeah.
like, come on.
Yeah, like
Don't y'all have enough?
seriously. Yeah, but that whole thing was just a very enraging time to be on social media. And I want to go back to
Hmm.
the trans kids in sports, but really
Oh
quick,
yeah, go ahead.
just going back to where we were talking about like the biblical
Hmm.
representations,
Yeah.
there's always this argument that sodomy and the passage men shouldn't lie with men, that those are the sort of like excuses for why queer people are condemned to hell. And I think it points to a very significant amount of ignorance, that these people are not understanding that sodomy is not consensual. It is
Hmm.
not at all the same as a consensual relationship between two same sex people. That is an abuse of power. And typically in the Bible, the passage that men shall not lie with men was mistranslated from saying either men should not lie with boys or men should not like lie with boys as they lie with women, something along those lines. And then
Yeah.
they just take that and confuse it and use that to vilify a group of people that are trying to do nothing but
Yeah.
live their lives peacefully. Like
There's so
we
many,
don't
yeah.
want this attention. I mean, we just want to be able to go to the grocery store without
Yeah.
being harassed, which I actually had a situation with my wife with when we were living in Yorktown. She went to
Mhm.
the Food Lion right in front of our house, closest grocery store we had. She was there by herself, and she was checking out, and the cashier said, "Have a nice day, ma'am," I think. And Holly turned
Ugh.
around and was like, "Excuse me?" And the woman said, "Well, you can't really tell from looking at you." And she was like, "Why does it matter?" And the woman just kind of like shrugged and was like, "I don't know."
Just say have a nice day.
Right?
Just say
Like
have a nice day.
that's all that's necessary.
Yeah.
But she called me on her way back, and it's like a 2 minute drive home. But she was so shook up about it. She called me while she was
Yeah.
on the way home and told me about it. And I was like, "You've got to be freaking kidding me! Like this is not going to happen at the place that we go to the grocery store." So she got home with the car. I took the car, went right up there, got every manager I could and complained about it. And she no longer works there anymore. And I do not feel bad about it. That was one of my like proudest wife moments. But like now going back to
Mhm.
the the issues that trans people are facing.
In sports specifically, we were going to get into.
Yes, there is just something, like you said, very predatory about adults needing to physically examine a child to prove that they are
Yeah.
the sex that they say they are. And
Yeah.
there wasn't as much of an issue with that at the school that I was teaching with. We had more issues with bathroom usage because we had students that wanted to
Mm,
use single stall bathrooms, which were typically only reserved for the staff. But it just, it kind of blows my mind that these adults are suggesting these kinds of things without realizing
yeah.
how hypocritical and predatory it is.
It is.
And
They want to protect girls and women in sports, and then they're asking them to drop their pants in physicals and
yes,
to make sure
and
that they're really girls, quote
right.
unquote.
And we also already have or have had issues with um, coaches and medical
Yes.
examiners.
Physical therapists taking
Yes,
advantage of and sexually abusing and
exactly.
assaulting women.
Yes, and even boys in sports.
Hmm.
There was that university, Joe Joe somebody.
Oh, Joe Paterno, that is
Yes,
That's in my own state. That's Penn State University.
yes, and I'm pretty sure there's still a lot of people that talk highly about him or that
Yeah.
like apologize for him, and it's like how are you going to sit on that side but then not recognize what's so wrong about the other stuff that you're suggesting?
Yeah.
And I've heard of some situations. I mean, I always say that you can't tell that a person is trans, and even if there's kids that identify as trans, there could be kids that are intersex that don't know, or kids that
Yeah.
identify with their assigned sex at birth but still look more masculine or look more feminine,
Yeah.
and
And
it's
also
nobody's
people like,
business.
yeah, and gender presentation, the clothes you wear. I think people, I mean, like you said at the grocery store, well, I can't really tell by looking at you. And it's like, you're not supposed to, because gender presentation and the way we present doesn't have to even align to our gender. Like,
Exactly.
a lot, I mean, transness isn't based on, passability or
Hmm.
how many, or if you've had surgeries or if look a certain gender. If someone tells you their pronouns, if somebody says, this is my gender, that's their gender. And
Right.
I think people get so caught up in um just like people's genitalia, and it's
Hmm.
like, how is that the defining characteristic of transness when you'll never see it.
Right.
I don't
Exactly.
understand. There's this weird creepiness of the whole, anyone who's transphobic, there's just that inherent like creepy, I mean, when it's kids too, that underlying pedophilia that's just like, I need to know what's in that kid's pants before they can get on the soccer field, which is
Yes.
disgusting.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure I don't know which state it was, but I'm pretty sure I have heard of some like parents or grandparents at games questioning a kid's gender or kid's sex
Yeah.
and
Oh
being
my God.
wrong. Like it was
Yeah.
like a girl that identified as a girl, and maybe she just looked a little bit more masculine, but you're wrong, and
Yeah.
that's the thing about it. Gender is a performance. The only time we're ever enacting gender is when we're in public view. When we're at home, it's like it doesn't exist because nobody can see it. So
Yeah.
it's
I love when
just
anybody talks about like J.K. Rowling. It's like, she's who's going to tell her she's a gender neutral bathroom every day at home?
that's so great. I love that. But yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
just it's so nonsensical, and it's so frustrating that these are the kind of things that people are having to worry about with
Yeah.
everything else that's going on in the world right now. Like there's a lot more pressing issues that we should be putting our energy into.
There are, and
Um
there's so much joy that we should be finding in other things. I think people,
yes.
especially online, are so caught up in hopping on hopping on the bandwagon to be upset about something. And I mean, I know I only have a few minutes left, but like, I would love to end this on, we were talking about queer joy and representation. Is there a piece of literature, media, film, TV that was, pivotal for you, or something that you recommend for young queer people to watch, read, listen to?
Um in terms of young queer people, I would say what what I watched as a young person that was like the closest to having representation, both in like some dark moments, but also positive moments, was probably Degrassi. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that was a big show for me, particularly with some of the arcs between Paige and Alex and Paige's kind of like identity journey in that way. I was kind of around the same age as that those episodes were airing. Um, but for older queer people, I would suggest Sense8, because it's a just a beautiful show, both about the sort of chaos in the world, but with many queer undertones and people, facing difficult situations with families or with the media, but rising above that and finding the beauty in their lives and the beauty in their relationships. I wish it had continued for more seasons, but it only had 2 seasons. Um, and then reading, I would suggest anything by James Baldwin, very important queer writer. And I actually have The Black Unicorn by Audre Lorde with me. Um, Very important and just prolific queer female writer, especially from a woman of color.
Yeah.
But I would say any kind of poetry from queer people. There's always some joy in there, and it's just so necessary right now.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I love that. I'll link all those down below. And yeah, again, I just think that queer art and representation right now, just queer joy. I love it when a TV show features a queer couple and there's no mention of their queerness. They just exist.
Yes,
I think
yes,
I,
absolutely.
I like I feel like the show has jumped the shark, but I commend Grey's Anatomy for in early seasons showing a
Yes,
lot of. I remember they had an episode in like season 2 or 3 with an intersex person, and
yes,
it
Bex.
was Bex, and
Yes.
I remember seeing that, and that was when I learned what intersex was. And I remember reading the book Middlesex in high school, which
Mm-hmm.
um, not frequently taught in schools. I felt lucky to read it, but there are so many examples of queerness and transness and
Yes.
intersex individuals, and I really appreciate it when authors and showrunners and films can not only display queerness but show an egg crack moment for a queer character,
Yeah.
um, or just show a couple. I know Grey's Anatomy is also, I'll credit it too, they've had a lot of gay parents on the show just being concerned about their children.
Yeah.
I mean, they've had doctors on the show who are queer too, showing queer relationships. That's come in more recent seasons, but I
Yeah.
really appreciate it too when queer people simply exist and
Yes.
they have
Absolutely.
full lives. I keep saying queer joy, but it's just like living and existing as a queer person and not having people point at you
Yes.
and call out your identity
Yeah.
in those scenes where you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that is often left out a lot of times in the media, especially when it comes
Mhm.
to story arcs around queer people. Um, there's always this kind of like focus on the coming out or
Yeah.
the um, the specific queer experience, and it's like that is part of being a queer person. But we go to the grocery store, we go to the
Yeah.
doctor, we go to the library. Like we are just regular people who do
Yeah.
some other things a little differently, but
Yeah.
most of it is all human, or all
Yeah.
all of it is all
Uh,
human, and I think
yeah,
that's
and a lot of
really
the story,
important.
yeah. A lot of the storylines too will show like parents not being accepting or show a lot of the conflict that arises when you come out. And again, I just appreciate it when like you show a queer couple going to Thanksgiving with their parents and seeing their
Yeah,
parents give them a hug, and there's not only that queer joy but that queer acceptance that I think we need to see of more in media, because as much as
yeah,
kids are seeing representation and seeing how to be queer now, parents also need to see in the media how to accept their kid. I
absolutely.
mean, there's no blueprint for being a parent, but
Right.
we should be showing more examples in the media for our parents of coming out stories, and this is how you accept a kid, and this is just what a normal holiday looks like when your kid, when your daughter brings her girlfriend home.
Yeah, no, I do really like that you mentioned Grey's Anatomy. I actually just finished
Mm-hmm.
watching the newest season, and I hadn't even thought about it because it is just so kind of ingrained in the
Yeah.
show, and that's something that I've always appreciated Shonda Rhimes doing with that show is normalizing and humanizing those experiences. Um, and I'm not sure if the statistic has changed, but I'm pretty sure um, Callie was or is the longest running queer lead on like a primetime TV show. I'm not sure if that's
I
changed
think
since then, but
so.
she was on the show for so long, Sarah Ramirez, and I just really applauded that. And she was a bisexual woman, which is huge because
I
bisexual
know,
people
yeah.
are always forgotten.
Yeah, and I think they are now. I think their pronouns are now they them.
Yes, you're
I know
right.
we're
I'm
talking about the
sorry.
character though. I know
Yes.
no, I know we're talking about the character, and I don't know where they stand on it. I know some people are totally fine with people using, different
Yeah.
pronouns if that was who they were playing.
Yeah.
But no, I think they must have been, unless maybe Arizona's character, Jessica Capshaw, maybe has overtaken that, because I know she's been on later seasons. But anyway,
That's
yeah,
true.
longest running
Yeah.
queer character on a show, and I mean, yeah, just having that representation, and as much as people kind of like joke about the show now, I mean, it's in season 20s, and we're replaying stuff that we've done in
Yeah,
previous
I've
seasons,
I've
and
binged it a couple times at this
I,
point.
I have too. It's like a comfort show for me. I grew up with that show,
It
but
really is.
it was so wonderful to have a show. I mean, like I said, when I saw an intersex, person, when I saw Bex on the show, that was the first intersex person I had ever heard of or seen before. I did not
Yeah,
know that intersex people existed. So it just goes to show too that that's not only an opening for queer kids to realize their queerness or their gender if they're trans, non-binary or intersex, but it's also a gateway to creating young allies, which
yeah,
obviously we
absolutely.
need more of,
Yeah,
because kids are so moldable, and I mean they should be seeing those examples. So I
absolutely.
love the suggestions you gave. I guess we're ending on, watch Grey's Anatomy, guys, and mind your business, mind your own business.
Absolutely. You
It's
can never
it's
go wrong.
You use a gender neutral bathroom at home, most of you, and it's really not your problem what's in someone else's pants. So
Yep, that's definitely. I couldn't
happy
say it any
Pride.
better. Yeah,
Happy
great,
Pride. Don't
great
worry
way,
about
great
other
way to close
people's.
out Pride
Yeah,
Month.
yeah. Happy Pride. Don't worry about other people's genitals, and have a good one.
I like that.
But anyway, no, thank you so much, Ace, for coming on the show. I will link to all of your wonderful writing, poetry, blog below. And
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
so is there anything else you want to promote?
Um, I don't think so. I think I covered everything.
Yeah. Oh,
It's
where can
all
we find you on socials?
my socials, I think on everything. I don't post as much on TikTok, but I do
Mhm.
still pop in. TikTok, Threads, and Instagram is all ace.howlen.poet.
Lovely. And those will
Yeah,
be linked below. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for coming on. Everybody check out
absolutely.
Ace's work.
Thank you so much for
Go follow
having
them on
me.
all the socials. Yeah, it was so amazing to have you. You'll have to come on again another time. I feel like we just barely kind of cracked the surface on
Oh,
a
I
lot of these
know.
topics,
There's
but
so much more we could go into.
seriously, no, we could have like we could just have a podcast, honestly, about queer issues.
Yeah, I
But
would
yeah,
love that.
check out. Yeah, I would. Maybe you should do it. Oh my gosh.
I've been
There we
thinking
go.
about it. My like microphone is in storage right now, so I've just been kind of like frothing at the mouth, thinking of
Mm-hmm.
ideas and things to talk about. So that's why I started the blog, so
Yeah.
I can just do something to
Yeah.
put things out there in the meantime. But
Yeah,
you
maybe you'll
might
have
see
an
that in the
accompanying,
works.
yeah, an accompanying Crystal Queer podcast, perhaps.
Yeah, I like it. That's a great way to go.
I love it. So yeah, Ace, thank you so much for coming on. Everybody check out her work. It'll all be linked down below. And yeah, I'm Carly Sabella. I'm a talking person, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.